everybody. My name is Alberto Marquez. In this video we will talk about ARENA reports and the issues with utilization and what happens when we have excess utilization of resources. Here we have a model that we have previously created. In this model we create an entity, assign part number, and then we separate it in two different parts and process it in parallel. One of them requires a resource, the other is just a delay, and some of them will have rework. 10% of them will have rework, and then we assemble them again into a single entity. Then we process them again, and then we dispose them. With the process in 6 does not require a resource at this moment. Let's add that resource by executing sysdelay release, and we are going to use a resource number 2 in such a way that we have one resource at the beginning and in process 4, and then one resource later on in process 6. Something that happens is the time between arrivals has a mean of 1 entity per hour, and the process time both at the process has 1 hour and process 4, and also 1 hour in process 6. And that generates a problem because we have now a utilization of 100%. ARENA in the student version model only supports 150 entities at the same time, simultaneously in the system, modeling 150 entities, and that will generate an issue because you have now queues that are so heavily utilized that the number of entities will grow, exceeding the 150 entities. If I run this model long enough, I will eventually reach that problem. Let me change the setup conditions for the running. And I will, in run control, I can control the speed of the replication. I can run it as a batch with no animation. So if I run it like this, there will be no animation, and very fast you see it's giving me an error for maximum of 150 entities exceeded. And the reason for that is, as I said, the utilization is too heavy. The utilization at the resources. So I can figure out that what the problem is if I use the reports. There are several things I can do with the reports. If you go to the resources report, you can see resource 1 is used 98% and resource 2 is 90%. And the reason why resource 1 is used 98% and resource 2 only 90% is because, if you remember, in the decide, 10% of the entities are going to be reprocessed. That means that actually the processing time becomes larger for 10% of them. It has to be passed again, increasing by 10%. So if the average time is originally 1 hour, now it's going to be 1.1 hour. And that will create utilization of larger than 100% eventually. And because of that, you will have issues with the utilization. One way to solve for this problem, it would be just like in real life. We can change the number of resources. So if I go to basic processes I have the list of my resources. Right now I have resources 1 for resource type 1. I will change that to 2, and also I will increase the number of resources in resources type 2 to 2 as well. Okay, so that should avoid any problem with the excess of entities. Now I unselect the run animation with batch control, and I can run now the simulation. Let me see how many entities are we creating. We are creating an infinite number of entities. Very good. So we just execute the simulation, and now you can see we will not have that issue, and we can run it. You have alternatives to control the simulation. We can pause temporarily, or we can set it up and have more than one replication. We can calculate a warm-up period to avoid issues or biases in the estimates of the statistics due to the fact that at the beginning the system was empty. We can determine the replication length and the number of hours per day in case we have shifts, and the time units right now are specified in hours, but we can change that. We can specify a terminating condition. There are other changes we can do. We can run the simulation faster or slower. Let me go with a simulation or animation that goes slower, and I change that in run speed. And there are other pause between replications and other advanced parameters like the project title and the project description, and if you want to collect costing statistics, etc. So at this moment, let's leave it like this. Let's keep running. You will see that the entities are more visible now because I'm running at a slower pace, or I can increase the speed of that simulation, maybe 100 times faster now. And the entities are not clearly seen, but you will see the queues growing and decreasing because we have now 2 resources for process 2 and 2 resources for process 6. The queues are not growing too much, and maybe after a little while we can stop the simulation and we can ask for the reports, and we can check, for instance, entities. We have entity 1. The total time in the system was on average 2.67 hours with a variance of 3.22. The number of entities that went in was 5,852. Some of them were left out in the system at the end of the simulation because the number out was only 5,841. So 11 entities were left in the process. If we look at the queues, we have 3 queues. 1 queue to batch the entities, and 1 queue associated with process 4, that's resource 1, and 1 queue associated with process 6, that's resource 2. And you can see that the waiting time is larger for the batching process and the resource 1, just before the resource 1, and you can see that's the average waiting time, and the number of entities waiting is 0.64 when entities waiting to be batched together again with their corresponding partner, and in process 4 there is an average of 0.35 entities, and in process 6 0.07 entities waiting to be processed. If we look at the utilization of the resources, we have two resources, resource 1 in process 4 and resource 2 in process 6. The utilization is 56 and 50 as expected, because remember, now we have two of them, but resource 1 need to be processing the equivalent of 110% of the arrivals, because 10% of them will be re-entering due to reprocess. The number of resources BC on average is 1.12 for resource 1 out of 2, and the number of resource BC for resource 2 is 50%, one of them. The total number of resources scheduled is 2, and the number of times that the resource 1 was seized was 2,153. Compare that to 1,949 for resource 2, and the scheduled utilization is the same, 0.56 and 0.50. So these reports are very useful. You can find them in the reports section. You can close them by clicking on this X right here, almost the top of the corner, and you can come back to your model and keep editing if you have to. Hope you find these useful. I'll see you next one.